Welcome to Words on Air. I'm your host, Lindsay Smith. Today on the show, a conversation with Kiese Laymon and Clemens Hurd. Kiese Laymon is the author of a novel, Long Division, as well as an essay collection, How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America. He is hard at work on a memoir called Heavy, and he's a professor of African American Studies and English at the University of Mississippi. Clemens Hurd is a Tulsa Artist Fellow. He's also a recent graduate of the MFA program in creative writing at Oklahoma State University. His poems have appeared in journals such as Muse, Obsidian, and Four-Way Review. He's also received special recognition from the Furious Flowers Centennial, Gwendolyn Brooks Centennial Poetry Prize Committee.
So I'm just going to jump right in. I'm going to jump right in and ask you about the new memoir, Heavy. Could you talk about it a little bit? Could you tell us a few things about the memoir?
Yeah, so it started out as this supposed to be a weight loss book.
Okay.
In college, I lost like 150 pounds, and a few years later, maybe 10 or 15 years later, I gained like 150 pounds. So 150 pounds was this like marker for me. I was trying to lose 150 pounds while talking to my family about weight, food, racial terror, sexual violence. And then in the middle of that process, listening to my grandmother, my mother talk about their experiences with weight and sexual violence and racial terror, food, I realized that I needed to talk to them about it. So I went back and revised the book, and I wrote the book to them about my experiences with metaphoric weight and literal weight, and the words we use to really evade responsibility for, weight.
Sure. So from your reading last night, you one of the words, if you don't mind me saying it, was gross.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit about that scene, that part of the book where you speak about a friend being called gross and the feelings behind that?
Yeah. So I went to I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. I went to black schools, majority black schools, my entire life, and then in 8th grade, the school we went to closed, and a lot of us were asked to transfer to this other school, which was a majority white school called St. Richard's. And at that school, again, it was the first time we'd ever been in school with white students. We'd had white teachers before, but near the end of that school year, one of our teachers came to my friend and came to me and asked us to talk to one of my other friends, because she said that everybody in school said he was gross. Right. And it was the first time we'd ever really heard that word spoken. We might have seen it on television at the time. And so that scene is just really about thinking about how one to tell someone you love that a teacher thinks they're gross, but also thinking about why we never heard that word until we got to that school.
Sure.
And what that, and so again, the book is just about, it's about experiences, but it's also about the words. And so gross was just a word we never imagined. And it was a word we didn't feel comfortable telling our friend because we knew it would break his heart and hurt. But my experiences at that school were gross experiences retrospectively. And so I just wanted to explore that a little bit in that chapter.
Sure. Yeah, and it was phenomenal, by the way.
Thanks,
it was phenomenal
that's
reading. On that note, I mean, we have the term gross, but part of our heritage would be playing the dozens and actually making fun of, what you do in your books as well, right? Is the act of calling someone out of their name, but as it can be somewhat endearing as well, and can be a sign of love. There's actually Denez Smith, who has a poem now that's an amazing poem, right? And he has a form called The Dozens. But could you speak a little bit about the difference between thinking about the dozens or thinking about making fun of in a very loving way versus being called something like gross?
Yeah,
right?
so, when I grew up in the 90s and late 80s in Mississippi, we were children of people who played the dozens, so we didn't call it the dozens. We called it other things.
Right.
But there was a competitive nature to like rhetorical battles, whether it was rap battles or using words like that, like gross, and flipping words. So like after 8th grade, we all started to use gross, but in our way. But for me, like ever since I was a kid, like my family, my uncles, my cousins would always engage in these sort of loving diss sessions, right? So like, but you always knew there was a line you couldn't cross, and often that line was your mama.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
Like you couldn't say anything about
no,
anybody's mama,
right.
couldn't say anything about anybody's partner.
Right.
And you know, my book is written to my mother because I'm trying to explore what it means to grow up in a culture that on one level is so reverent of mothers and grandmothers, but on the flip side, I want to think a lot about what that love actually means. So we said we loved our mothers, we said we loved our grandmothers, but there were so many things we just weren't comfortable telling them. They said they loved us, and they did, but there was like a lot of dishonesty in that love. So the book is actually trying to explore that.
Okay, so the dishonesty in that, I want you to speak a little bit more about that. The dishonesty, or saying that I love you, but is the love, the way we show love or how much we tell. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, I grew up, my mother had me, she was 19, it was just us, we grew up together, and I say this in the first chapter of the book, you know, I would, to this day, you know, I'm a pacifist, but I kill for my mother. You know, if somebody's harming my mother or threatening to harm my mother, like I'm not bragging, I just know I would attempt to kill them. I don't think that's a good thing, especially because there's so many things that I will not talk to my mother about. So what I'm trying to, again, think about is what does it mean in this country when we say we love so many things, and sometimes, like, the proof of our love is that we will harm for that person, we will kill for that person. But what I'm saying is, but will you tell that person the truth? Will you explore honestly what it means to be you with that person? Will you listen to that person explain their truth to you? And often the answer is no. You know what I'm saying? So for my mother and I, we grew up super intimate. She was young. I was a black boy in Mississippi. She was a young black woman in Mississippi. And, you know, we saw each other and we saw things happening to one another, and we would fight for one another, but we would do everything possible to keep the honesty, the things that we really probably should have talked about, from one another. And I don't think that's just our family and my mother and myself, but I think that's a national, maybe international problem, but definitely a national problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. So to move around a little bit, because I have an interest in music as well.
Yeah, okay,
you have
good,
a huge interest in music,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because you have parts about one of your books where it's you're in the bathroom with friends, right? And y'all are beatboxing, y'all are rapping, but you also have scenes where you're talking about hip hop and New York hip hop specifically around that time being so big, right? But knowing of people who are out in Houston, maybe Ghetto Boys, and having so many of these artists, I want to talk to you about the way that your work moves, because it is somewhat musical. But could you talk about the influence that music has on your work? Can
I ask you a question too, though?
Sure.
Growing up in New Orleans, were you a big No Limit fan, or was that?
What's funny is I had a very different upbringing with music, so I wasn't a huge fan of No Limit, right? But they got respect because the No Limit, and they were some of the first to do it, if not the first, right? And so they got respect. But I was more Cash Money, Hot Boys.
That's who you. That's
Lil Wayne, Juvenile. Really, Lil Wayne and Juvenile, my two.
Did you like the Northeast rap at all, like the New York rap at all?
So yes, so. I didn't dance when I was young, right? I'm just now, 5 years, I'm like, man, I'm dancing everywhere.
Yeah.
But when I was younger, they would play, maybe Juvenile, and people would be dancing, but I didn't feel that. So I knew with New York and East Coast, I could just, pop my head, with some Jay-Z or something. He wasn't asking me to dance. I could just chill on the wall and look like everybody else, right?
That's right.
So, Northeast, I was a huge fan of, Jay-Z and I guess Joel Santana, Dipset, and Rockefeller.
Dipset. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, man. Yeah. Freeway, all of that.
Yeah. So, I'm older than you are. So when I came up, Southern, when I was maybe high school, there wasn't much rap that we considered Southern. There was rap that came out of the South, UGK, definitely Scarface, Ghetto Boys, but they were really claiming the South in a way that we wore on our shirts, right? It wasn't really until Outkast came out and said that thing at the Source Awards, the South got something to say. And then we, as growing up in Mississippi, we're like, oh, we are part of this too. Because before that, we gave Outkast to Atlanta, we gave Ghetto Boys to Houston. We knew we had more in common with them than we had with the musicians out of the East Coast. But we still didn't really consider ourselves like part of like what they were doing, like their project. But then when Cass came out and said, in New York, the South's got something to say, like I remember, man, I just remember being like, oh, okay, like now we can talk back
like
to
permission.
the Northeast. Yeah, it was permission.
Yeah,
it was permission. It was definitely permission. And it impacted my writing too, because before that, you know, I was imitating Faulkner a bit because my mother told me to, and my teachers told me to. And I was imitating a lot of writing I was seeing coming out of the Northeast, particularly New York. But I wasn't really sure you could write essays or fiction about, you know, urban or rural places in Mississippi, because I hadn't really seen a contemporary artist do it. And then when hip hop really starts to blow in the South with Cass and Ghetto Boys, and then where I'm from, David Banner, Kamikaze had this group called Crooked Letters, and then I'll start to think, oh, okay, so like there's something interesting in my upbringing that I can actually put on the page and maybe people will care. Because before that, I really think I was passing as a literary writer. Like I was trying to pass as a New York writer, and I was trying to pass as this white, like anachronistic Southern writer, and I wasn't any of those things. You know what I'm saying? So hip hop, I think, gave me permission for sure.
When did you feel like you arrived at that freedom that you're speaking of?
I mean, the hard part I think is that every day I feel like I'm trying to arrive or reckoning with that arrival. You know what I mean? It's tough too, because you know my state is so rich in literary history, from Richard Wright to Margaret Walker Alexander to Faulkner to now Jesmyn Ward to a host of other people.
Definitely.
But at the time, it's in this weird, strange way. I just didn't think that we had a lineage that I wanted to be a part of. We do, but I just didn't. I didn't think we did. And then, really, like hip hop, hip hop changed a lot of it for a lot of young black writers and who grew up in the 80s and 90s. You know, because Richard Wright and then they seem so far away from us. Faulkner seemed so far and culturally far away. So I think we needed to hear young people our ages sort of reckoning with their actual place in the nation. And we needed to know that there was an audience for that, for us to be like, okay, so now I can tell, like the story I told last night, like I know there's an audience for that, because I know there's an audience for this. And then we want to take some of the literary, stylistic things that Faulkner did, that Wright did, that Margaret Walker Alexander did, and try to apply that. So that's me. That's how I did it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I want to go back to something you said last night at the reading, when you were speaking about a friend who appears in Heavy, but she also appeared in was it Lone Division, I believe?
Yeah.
Is it Shalala?
Shalaya Crump.
Shalaya Crump. So you said that she asked to be in both.
The name, that's not her last name, but her first name.
Her first name.
She so growing up where I grew up, there are a lot of people who know I write, and even if they've never read anything I want that I've written, they're always like, can you put me in your book? And so sometimes the answer is yes. Like if there's something particular about this person that I can make into a character, for sure.
Right.
But this friend, I just like her name. Her name was Shalaya. I never met another person named Shalaya. And she asked me if she could be in my book, my novel. And I was like, I love your name. Can I take it? She's like, yeah. And then I was writing this other book, and I was like, you know, I had to make a composite of all these characters because legally I just had to make a composite. So I had to name this composite something.
Right.
And and I wanted to name her Shalaya again. Shalaya. And I'm doing this new novel, and so on. It comes out next year.
Okay.
And there's a Shalaya in that too. So I'm trying to do something interesting with those names. But I really just like that name a lot, Shalaya.
Okay, because I was wondering about process. I was wondering, is the character already there and it's just an unnamed character, or are you, when someone says, like when she says, I want to be in the book, are you saying, oh, I'm gonna make this character?
Well, yeah. So that woman in real life, that young woman is a lot of things, but she's so audacious.
Okay.
And so like a lot of times, I need to know characters' names before I can actually like characterize them. But I know the characteristics of the Shalaya characters in all my work. They're different in lots of ways, but one of the things they are similar is they just have lots of audacity that comes out in the strangest times, but they also have like a quiet audacity, right? They're not just all bombastic, but they're often the most audacious people in the chapter or the entire project. And in all three of these projects, the Shalaya characters are complicated, but also like, you know, not to mess with them. And that's how this young woman was. Shalaya, she laughed and she played, but when you crossed that line, it was a wrap. Somebody was gonna get dusted that day. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move to let's move to talking about heavy and talking about what is there a certain thing that you want the reader to get from that, or maybe the other side, is it a certain thing that you don't want them to get from heavy?
That's a tough question, man. I mean, I don't want the reader to come away from this book thinking that this is just like a traditional memoir or a traditional health book.
Okay.
You know, like as someone who has, you know, through eating disorders, gotten themselves down to like 2% body fat, and as someone who's been as high as like 340 pounds, like I don't want people to think that I'm saying that health and weight, whether it's low weight or high weight, are in any way interchangeable, right? So I'm talking about weight. I'm talking about weight, but I'm also talking about the weight we all carry on our back. I'm talking about the weight that our parents give us and the nation gives us. So it's not a book that's encouraging weight loss or weight gain. It's a book that's encouraging reckoning. You know, thinking and talking with the people you love about how you got to where you are, and listening to the people you love talk to you about how they got where they are in the hopes of being better tomorrow. But really the book is all about how we have no chance tomorrow if we're not honestly assessing like today and yesterday. There's no chance. And so that's what I hope people get from it, you know, without being didactic or heavy-handed. And most importantly, again, I'm writing the book to my mom, so I'm hoping in the process, I was hoping my mother and I could talk about some things we just hadn't talked about that we needed to talk about, and we did.
Okay. So in How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America, in reading that book, I got to page 18 and I found myself in tears. And now in that book, it actually starts on page 15, I believe. So this is just a few pages.
Oh, that's that Uncle Jimmy? Was it Uncle Jimmy?
Yes, Uncle Jimmy. So, which felt so authentic to me, and it just came like it was supposed to come, tears. And so I have a question about not so much of just the tears, but the feeling. I wanna know about the feeling and how you know the feeling is completely there, or how you know a project or a book or anything that you're doing is finished in that way, and what are the gauges that you use?
I'm terrible at that question because I don't ever think it's done.
Okay.
You know, I think I have deadlines, so I have to get it out of my hands, thank goodness, because I obsess over things if I just hold on to them.
Sure.
But, you know, I was reading last night from the actual galleys of the book. The book comes out in October, but it's ready for purchase, and my reading of what I read last night, you know, I changed a few things in reading it, because I just don't think things are ever done. You know, honestly, like I think, especially if we're talking about transactional nature of art, you know, some publishing company can be like, I want to publish this now. And I'm like, okay, but I'm not going to grant that corporation the ability to tell me my art is finished.
Right.
You know, like they want to publish it now, that's cool. But I probably need to keep thinking through it.
Okay.
The negative side of that is that I never let anything go, right? Like, so when I move on to other projects, often because I haven't let this other past project go, I'm taking all of my insecurities and all of my, you know, anxieties from this project into another project. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying it's the way to go. I just know, for me, honestly, I just never feel like anything I've ever written is done, anything. Okay. And that makes me hard to be around sometimes, because I'm just like, it's not. Yeah, when it's out there, you're just like, oh, I wish I could change it for people, but you can't.
But you can. It's already out there.
You got to do something new.
Unless another, you know, I guess edition.
Another edition, exactly.
Comes out there. Yeah. So I can, you know, manipulate this in a way.
Even this new book, Heavy, like when it started, like I said, it started out being about just weight and weight loss, but it moved to being about gambling. I'm thinking about that being in Oklahoma. Driving through here, I just saw more casinos than I've seen in a lot of places. In Mississippi, we have a lot of casinos on the coast. We have some in Tunica. But the book also is about my family's relationship to gambling. And so when I finished the first draft of the book, I was like, this book sort of works, but there's a big thing I'm not talking about, and I wasn't talking about it because I didn't know how to.
Okay.
You know, because it's one thing to talk about your family and your experiences with sexual violence, but in my family, it's almost more taboo to talk about our relationships to money, or our relationships to like losing massive quantities of money in machines that are programmed to take your money. Do you know what I'm saying? And so like my book is framed by like our Black Southern families, you know, really addiction to gambling. Now I haven't seen that written about. Well, a few people have written about it, but I'm trying to write about it in a different way. But again, I can only do that through revision. Like the editor thought the book was done. I was like, it's not really done. Let me go back and do some stuff. So sometimes it works, but often it doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you're saying sounds like it, but I'm going to ask this question anyway.
Yeah.
What surprised you when writing Heavy? What was a surprise? Or were there many surprises?
Man, that's a hard question. You know, that book just took so long. What surprised me most was that I couldn't write the book that I actually wanted to write unless I wrote it to my mother. So I started writing that book to my grandmother, and then I just wrote like a standard narration, just like to like just there wasn't a you, there was just like a reader that I didn't address. Then I wrote it I tried to do this thing where I was writing it to different partners in my life who I've had, from my first girlfriend to my last girlfriend. And then eventually I was just like, yo, if I'm gonna tell the truth in this book, I really have to write it to my mom. And the thing that surprised me the most was after I wrote it to my mother and I gave it to her, I just thought she was gonna be heartbroken. One, that some of the things I was talking about, also that I would show it to the world. And she was a little bit of that, but she also was just like, okay, let's talk about money. Like, let's really talk about gambling in our family. And then, so she told me some things that I just didn't know about my grandmother, my grandfather. Same thing when it happened around not just sexual violence, but like sex. Like that was just something we never talked about in our, my mom would tell me to stay away from certain girls, and I'd encourage her to stay away from certain men. But we didn't talk really about sex or sexual violence. And so this book encouraged us to have these conversations that were still awkward and hard, but necessary. So that's been the most surprise, like that the book actually did in real life encourage conversations that I think were necessary.
Definitely. They definitely sound necessary.
Yeah.
So I really want to get into that, but I know we don't have that much more time. I'm going to ask you one more question.
Okay.
And this, I guess, will be a lighter one. So, Big Crit.
Ooh.
Big fan?
Oh my goodness.
I just have to end by asking you, what's your favorite song, man? What's your favorite track?
Crit is, I mean, we could get into it, man. I think Crit is the best. For me, Crit is the best right now. For me.
Understandable,
meaning that, like, he moves me the most. I think he does consistently over time more meaningful work than anybody else. And I love Kendrick. I think Kendrick is probably the most special rapper that I've ever really heard, and not just rapper, but writer. But because Crit is from Meridian, which is like 30 miles from where my grandmother lives, and he reminds the listener that all the time, but he also takes you different places. Before I do readings, man, in New York, I always listen to Mount Olympus. I don't know if you know the song Mount Olympus.
Oh, definitely.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, I'm not going in there to fight, but I gotta feel like I'm going to.
Like
you know what I mean?
Spaz, definitely.
And he helped me. I mean, even my time up at Vassar, which was a good time in a lot of ways, but also just a terrifying time. Like that music from Big Crit, like reminded me not just of Mississippi and not just of Jackson and not just the forest, but it reminded me of my grandmother's porch, which I talk a lot about in this book, because I knew he knows similar porches, and just sitting on grandmama's porch and listening to her and looking across the street at trailers and dirt and clay, and I needed to be reminded of where I was from when I was in New York. And I wasn't from like just a country place. We're from a country place for sure, but we're also from like a place of like amazing genius, and to me, that's what Crit is. So I'm hoping to do something with Crit actually in the next few months.
Really?
Yeah, but I don't want to talk about it yet.
Okay.
Because it's supposed to be a secret, but we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I appreciate that question though.
Man, I appreciate your answer. We'll have to talk a little bit more about that later. Definitely. So, thanks for watching. Kiese Laymon. My name is Laymon Hurd. Take care.